So those of you who know me well know that I happen to have a real affection for the Bible. Now, I never land on Jesus loves you and worship God. That's not why I love the Bible. I love the Bible because within it I find stories of human foibles and suggestions that help us understand alternate ways to deal with certain situations. And it's full of really good wisdom, advice, often tracking what you find in other traditions, Hindu, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism. I mean, truth is truth. I grew up with the Bible as my first touchstone, and so I still have an affection because I look at it as literature, not as a work that is trying to force me to have a certain set of beliefs, but rather is trying to teach me how to live a wiser, more fulfilled life. So before I start the message today, I'm going to share with you just a couple of verses from Proverbs. Now, the book of Proverbs is understood by scholars to be kind of a how-to booklet for the young men in the king's court who were going to become leaders one day. And it is just full of advice on how to live a life of integrity, a life of compassion, how to avoid some of the pitfalls that human beings are often tempted to fall into. Applicable to today's message are a couple of them out of the 11th book of Proverbs. The first I share with you is this advice: give freely and become more wealthy. Interesting. Give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. What a lovely idea. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. And then again, in another portion of Proverbs 11, this is around verses 24, 25, in case you all still have Bibles that you like to go to every now and then. This is an observation. It says, the world of the generous gets larger and larger. The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. What great advice. I imagine that the conversation is between the wise men in the king's court, and a bunch of pre-adolescent boys, basically, because in those days, they're the ones who mostly inherited the responsibilities of the family, the status, the obligations. So I kind of see them just sitting there, maybe on the floor at the feet of someone with a robe, maybe a long white beard, giving them these bits of advice. And I just often find such gems. The world of the generous gets larger and larger. The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. Now we're going to be focusing on a few spiritual practices which have always been at the heart and soul of the world's religions. And they're also key elements of today's, shall we say, less organized spirituality movements. I always sort of laugh. People say, I'm not for organized religion. I say, come join us, we aren't. I'm spiritual but not religious. And I say, well, religion comes from a root that means connection, so come join us and be connected. But these spiritual practices help us discover our deepest values, address our longing to connect with the divine and with each other, and propel us on our journey to wholeness. Spiritual practices are specific activities you do to deepen your relationship with the sacred and the world around you. Practices help you connect to God, or whatever name you use to describe that something more beyond yourself. They enable you to become actively engaged with your inner or true self, the depth of your being. They create pauses in the chaos around us, in the busyness of life, and invite us to take a moment of reflection and connection to our deeper selves. They expand the breadth of your experiences, encouraging you to relate in a particular way to other people and the whole of creation, including animals and inanimate beings. You get a chance to reflect on your place in the universe, what it is you have to offer, how it is that you fit into this larger picture, which has so many secrets still in it. Science and medicine and philosophy and are all still trying to understand this larger world that we're a part of. We are what we practice, Jewish writer Avram Davis observed. If we become angry a lot, then essentially we are practicing anger. And we get quite good at it. Conversely, if we practice being joyful, then a joyful person we will become. So we practice all kinds of things all the time, but the decision to do spiritual practices is intentional. These activities have meaning and purpose, and they influence how we live our lives. Practices are very concrete and practical, and they help you think about real ways you can walk your talk. So we're going to talk about generosity of heart first. It's a willingness to stay in connection with others and to put their interests before your own. It's an attitude that places the highest value on human well-being. I'm happy, Jyoti, to expand that to animal well-being, ecological well-being, the well-being of others that share this planet and existence with us, but going beyond yourself in a generous way. Those of you who come from a Christian background may remember the advice offered in 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. And I'm paraphrasing here. I think most of you will have heard this. The rich should not put their hope in wealth. They should do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share with others. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. And we're aware, I think, of many stories about people needing to not focus solely on financial well-being and the accumulation of things. Now, there's nothing wrong. We aren't preaching poverty here. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable, being prudent in your financial affairs. But you know, for some people, accumulating money is a game. And they're playing a game with resources that are life-giving to other people. And because they have it stored up, other people don't have access to it. And some people have misunderstood their own personal worth in terms of monetary gain. They think that they're only worthy if they have a certain number in their bank account, or they have a certain number of toys, or a certain number of houses, and that without all of that, somehow they are less a valuable human being. And we know better. We know that all of that is there and it's part of this existence, but that what really matters is the worth and dignity of each human being, and that it comes kind of baked in We get born with worth and dignity. Now, we can mess that up. We can do a lot of harm to the world. We can make others dislike us. We can hurt others. But still, at the core, there is a value to being a human being. When we're acting out of a generosity of heart, we bring loving kindness into the face of judgment, forgiveness in the face of condemnation, and attention in the moments we are tempted to banish someone from our attention and heart. In the moments when your mind feels too full to truly listen to another person, explore the possibility of stepping out of the swirl of all those thoughts and attend with care and sensitivity to the person asking for your attention and asking for your presence. As a minister, this is one I have to practice fairly often. As the person I am, it's a challenge. It has been noted that I get task-oriented. I set my sights on something, I put my head down, and everything else disappears for me. But as a minister, someone may have a personal situation that needs attending to. Someone may have a suggestion for how I might do what I'm attempting to do a little better, a little more kindly. And so I have to stop sometimes and go, whew. It's that deep breathing thing. It really does help. And just sort of let what's going on in my head, let that focus set aside for a moment and turn and say, how can I help you? What can I do for you? What message do you have for me? Now, I am not perfect at this, and some of you here can testify to that, but I do try. And I do see it as a spiritual practice, as an opportunity to get out of my own focus and my own head and be connected more deeply to the people around me. Notice the moments when you find yourself caught in judgment, greed, or impatience in your day. Sense what happens when instead of acting on those impulses, you're able to pause and be more generous with your patience and acceptance. It really is a matter of just deciding that the person or the situation in front of you is more worthy of your attention at that moment and being in the moment than whatever I had planned for the day, or you had planned for the day, or you wanted to check off your list. Sense what happens in your own heart and mind in the moments when you find yourself able to be truly generous. Be aware of the happiness and joy that are intrinsic to authentic generosity of heart. Now, generosity of spirit is related and overlaps, all of these do, because they all have the word generosity in them. But they're slightly different, they're nuanced in their focus. Generosity of spirit is the openness and willingness to share our own gifts freely with others, joyously and willingly and without expectation of receiving anything in return. And it's our gifts, our spiritual gifts, our patience, our love, our kindness, our time, our appreciation, our thoughtfulness, our gratitude, all of these things that reside within us and that we are sometimes stingy with. The generosity of spirit as a practice invites you to be more intentional and mindful and to be more open and expansive and inclusive. Generosity of spirit is created through respect and compassion for others. It involves experiencing and celebrating that which is important to another person. We exhibit generosity of spirit when we revel in each other's joys and comfort one another in our times of sorrow. And what I'm talking about here is what happens after the joys and sorrows candles. The generosity of spirit is when you walk up to someone who is shared in coffee hour and you say, I'm so sorry to hear about that, or I'm here if you'd like to talk about that. Or, oh my goodness, that is so wonderful. I am so excited for you. That's generosity of spirit. Entering into the life experience of someone else and sharing it with them. Now, we've had a task force pretty much since I've been here working on congregational governance, and we're getting ready to enter into a season of education and then voting on some changes in the bylaws, and boy, doesn't that sound boring. Yeah, I can see you all are getting all excited about that one. But believe it or not, generosity of spirit has a place in congregational governance. It entails giving others latitude, permission to make mistakes, and the resources they need to do their jobs well, whether that's paid staff or members who are serving the congregation on specific tasks. It means giving others authority that goes with the responsibility and giving them due credit for their ideas. Like, the worst thing in the world is to be given a job, and then you don't have the resources and you don't have the authority to make the decisions that you need in order to get the job done. Oh, that's awful. I've been there. Some of you probably have too. Generosity of spirit within our congregational governance makes a point of saying, as a practice, let's be intentional together about making sure that those who are working on behalf of our congregation are honored and respected, are given the resources they need and the authority, and are allowed to make mistakes. It also means celebrating the success and efforts of others without envy or resentment, simply celebrating because someone else has something to celebrate. Ironically, though, this type of spiritual practice focuses on our willingness to share unconditionally, generosity of spirit enhances our life experience and brings us much more joy than we bring to others. It magnifies our own life experience of meaning. Generosity of acceptance. Now, I bet, being good UUs, if you read the description in the e-blast, you thought, oh, she's going to talk about diversity and inclusion. Nope, not what I'm talking about. No, I'm speaking of our own ability to accept the generosity of others. Have you ever asked someone if you can help them and get rebuffed, or actually do something nice for someone who obviously needed some assistance, and just have them, no thank you, no I appreciate it, no that was very nice of you, nothing acknowledging the fact that you've seen a need and helped to meet it, just a We're going back to the Bible today. It's one of our 6 sources, and I found it very useful in preparing this message. So this is another thing that you've heard, even if your background wasn't in Christianity. There's a portion of a Bible verse in Acts 20:35. It's often quoted as, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Those of you who grew up in Christian churches, you probably heard that around stewardship time, right? Pledging time. It's better to give than to receive, so give to us. Well, there's more to that. As often frustrates me is there's a whole message there. That's only the little bit tag at the end. The whole message is, and quote, "In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, we must help the weak, remembering it is more blessed to give than to receive." So in there's the idea that part of how we find meaning and connection with each other and with the divine is that we work for the benefit of others who, for a moment, may be weak, may be lacking. Because, lives are long, and a person who's in need today may be the benefactor of tomorrow. You never know. This may be true about being more blessed giving than receiving, but it shouldn't obscure another truth, and that is that when we are in trouble and someone offers to assist us, we should be gracious recipients. Now, I'm going to share a really personal story, and I might cry. Last Sunday I did. It came out of nowhere. I had preached that sermon 3 times, and I don't know what was going on, but I got a little emotional, and I may with this one, because this one I pretty much do every time I share this story. So here goes. Years ago, after I had closed my law practice and begun attending seminary full-time, and I was in a butts-in-the-seat seminary where you had to show up, and if you missed class more than, I think, 3 times, then you didn't get credit for that class. And I lived an hour and 15 minutes away from the seminary. So I closed my law firm because I couldn't do both things at the same time, and I began working at a relatively low-paying temporary legal support job with impossibly long hours, and I had a 3-hour commute each day, hour and a half to get there and an hour and a half to get home. And no paid time off and no benefits. It was the sort of job that in the healthcare field we would call scut work. It was lawyer scut work. And it was low paying because it was flexible, and so I could work my schedule around to be in class and to pay just barely enough to pay the bills. While I was involved in this, I befriended a Pakistani-American Muslim coworker. She and I had found camaraderie in our shared work experience, our parenting styles, and interest in building interfaith relationships. One week, after having been out of work for several days due to illness, I was back at work when I received a call from my sister letting me know that my then 81-year-old mother had fallen and broken her hip. The break was a simple fracture, and though she was in surgery, she was expected to make a full recovery. She was an hour away from me where I was. So I committed to spending the following evening at the hospital with her. The next morning, though, as I was driving to work, I received a phone call from my aunt informing me that my brother-in-law had had a heart attack and was in the hospital near my place of employment. So rather than go to work, I detoured and went to the hospital to stay with my sister and my brother-in-law. From there, I went to the hospital to stay with my mother, losing another full day of work. A few days later, my uncle, the husband of the aunt who called me to tell me about the brother-in-law who'd had a heart attack, was unexpectedly admitted to another nearby hospital for surgery. When it rains, it pours. I'm being paid by the hour. We're up to like a week now of unexpected loss of income. I was feeling besieged by circumstances and needed someone to talk to. So during one of our breaks, I opened up to my coworker and friend. Now, she and I had a habit of taking 15-minute breaks 3 times during a work day and just walking around because we were sitting in front of computers and all that. So during one of those walks, I expressed how difficult it was for me at that moment to work and respond to my family's needs, or even attend to my own. I had a teenager at home, and she could drive, and so she was pretty self-sufficient and relatively unaffected by all of this. But everybody else seemed to be needing my time, and I wanted to be there. There just weren't enough hours in a day. I also let slip that I was operating on such a slim financial margin at that point that having been out of work for a week posed a serious financial problem for me. Offhandedly, really, just offhandedly, I joked that at least I had some food in my pantry. Like I hadn't had time to go to the grocery store. Here's where, the next day, bless her heart, my friend came to work with a bag of groceries, from her own pantry and a $100 bill that came from her fund money. Although the independent woman that I am finds it difficult to accept any help from others, especially of the financial kind, with tears in my eyes and a catch in my throat, I graciously accepted her gifts because she offered them with such love and genuine desire to lessen my temporary financial distress. Now, I really could have bought groceries. I want you to know that. And I could have said that to her, and I could have sent her home saying, oh, thank you very much, but really, I'm not that destitute. I'm just so frustrated, and I haven't had time. But I didn't. I said to her, thank you so very much. We will enjoy these groceries. And it's very generous of you to share. Because I could tell that it gave her joy and gratitude to have such a good, and I was filled with joy and gratitude to have such a good and caring friend who responded so perfectly to my need, my expressed need. She heard me. And because she heard me, she did what she could in the moment to help alleviate some stress. And it would have been so mean and wrong if I had rebuffed her or made light of her generosity. And somehow, in that moment, the independent me, I don't know, must have been divine intervention, realized that. And I was able to graciously and with gratitude accept her offering to me. That's living your values. That's generosity as a spiritual practice. So these forms of spiritual generosity benefit those around us and ourselves. One way to hasten the beloved community we want the world to be is to spread these acts of generosity, of heart, of spirit, and of acceptance as far and as wide as possible. Again, I refer to the wisdom of the Bible. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6, told the congregation in Corinth that whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. That's an astute observation made by many religions and philosophical traditions, and it's great advice for us today. So let's adopt these spiritual practices and get out there and sow some seeds. Amen, ashe, and blessed be.